Hello folks, welcome to another video on Ansible. Today in this video I'll be taking you through a step-by-step process of hands-on example of how to use Ansible to provision EC2 instances on AWS. Frankly, what that means is we'll be learning how to use Ansible with AWS cloud. And this is going to be a two-part series. So in this part one, we'll focus on how to use Ansible to create EC2 key pair. But before we actually go into the video per se, before we go into the hands-on, I want to step back and just give a brief reminder of what this topic is all about. It's part of that broad topic under infrastructure as code. Of course, we know that, I believe we know that infrastructure as code is the concept, is the idea of defining the infrastructure, the underlying infrastructure that makes up of our application in form of a code or in form of a script that we can run again and again, right? That we can run in a way that is reliable, reproducible, in a way that we can automate. And most importantly, having the infrastructure that makes up our application in form of a code makes it easy for us to edit, to distribute our configuration. It makes it very easy to version our code, to take advantage of version control system. More importantly, infrastructure as code, having the infrastructure that makes up of our application in form of a code gives us certain advantages. One is speed of deployment, right? Because it's in form of code, we can scale up and down our infrastructure with just one by running just one command. Of course, it also reduces human errors, right? Because everything is defined in form of a code. Now, there's no need for human to go through to provision to interact with physical infrastructure and things like that. It reduces human error, and most importantly, consistency. It ensures that we can consistently reproduce our infrastructure. And the last thing I will actually mention is it eliminates the possibility of what we call snowflake server, right? Where it eliminates the possibility of configuration drift that may happen if provisioning were to be done manually. And there are so many tools out there that can be used as an infrastructure as a code. I mean, there are many infrastructure as a code too. I mean, one being Terraform. I believe that's the popular one. Of course, the cloud provider like AWS has its own infrastructure as code too, like Amazon CloudFront. Of course, we have Puppet, we have all this Chef, we have SaltStack. There's so many automation infrastructure as code too out there. But for the purpose of this video, we'll be focusing on using Ansible as an infrastructure as code to work with AWS cloud. So that being said, before we go into the hands-on again, I made some assumptions in this video. And let's quickly go through those assumptions quickly. So my first assumption is that you've set up your Ansible control node and you have all these requirements already installed on those nodes. The first being, of course, you have Ansible installed on your Ansible control node. Two is you have Python installed and the version is 3.6 and above, that you have Boto installed. You can check if you have that by using pip show Boto 3. And most likely, if you have Boto 3 installed, you already have Boto installed. You can also check with pip show Boto. And obviously, you also need Amazon.aws collection, which is a Amazon plugin that Ansible uses to interact with AWS. You can also check if you have that installed with Ansible Galaxy Collection list Amazon.aws. If you don't, you can use Ansible Galaxy Collection install Amazon.aws to install the plugin. But of course, before you can install Amazon.aws plugin, you need to have Python, Boto 3, and Boto installed. Once you have those installed, I also made assumption that you have AWS CLI and that you've configured your AWS authentication, right? You can check if you have AWS CLI installed by running any AWS command. So for example, you can run AWS S3 ls. If you get a response, if you list the bucket, that means you have it installed, and most likely you've configured your AWS authentication. If not, you can install AWS CLI and then run AWS configure, supply your AWS access key ID, supply your secret access key and the region, and then I believe you can proceed with the next stage of this video. With the requirements out of the way, I think the next thing I want to show us is to actually go on to Ansible documentation and show us the Ansible.aws collection, the Ansible plugin that we'll be using. So this is the page to the plugin, this is the plugin, the description, the communication, but the most important thing I want to show us is to show us that there are so many modules under this plugin, under this Amazon AWS plugin that Ansible will use to interact with AWS. So under this plugin, there are so many things you can do. There are so many things. You can do auto-scaling, you can create a scaling group, create and delete auto-scaling group, you can create EC2 AMI, you can create Elastic IP, you can create EC2 security group, you can create EC2 instances. For our purposes, we're going to start with EC2 key module. So let's click on this. So this is the module we're going to use. Yeah, we're going to be using AWS EC2. We're going to be using EC2 key module. The most important thing is to know requirement. Remember, I told us we need Python 3.6 and above. We need Boto core. This is where I got that from. This is where this came from, right? I also told us we have to have Amazon AWS plugin. So this is the information you can check. So this is where I got that from. So if you scroll to the bottom, you can actually see example of how to create EC2 key pair. So this is documentation is your friend. So that being said, let's go and create our playbook and create our first play. So the first thing we need to do now is to create inventory. You know the drill. So you create inventory directory. Inside the inventory, you create host file. Inside host file, just enter these commands. So we're going to create our host group as local host, and we only have one host, which is local host. And the reason why we're using local host is very simple. The assumption we are making here is we don't have any remote host to manage. We want to create EC2 instances, right, that will serve as our managed host. So in this case, we want our playbook to run on our local machine. We want it to run on our Ansible control node. That's why we are defining the only host we are defining here is the local host, which means we want to run our playbook on our local machine. So the next thing we need to do is to create our Ansible configuration file, ansible.cfg file. So in Ansible.cfg file, we define the path to our inventory. So this is important, and you define the path to your inventory. In my case, my inventory is in my current directory here, and it's inside inventory, and the file is host. That's it. Right? With this out of the way, I will save this. That's good. So now let's create our playbook. We call it EC2 underscore playbook. Okay, I've created my EC2 underscore playbook. So let me define my play. So my first play, so this 3 dash means this is a YAML file, and I've given my first play a name. I call it using AWS EC2 module. I don't know if that's good, but that's what I would call it. The host's name is localhost. Of course, you know where that is coming from. It's coming from this host that we defined before. That's good. That's good. And the local. So this is important, guys. The local connection means that we are delegating the task. We want our playbook to actually run on our local machine, right? How did I arrive at that? How did I know that? So let's go back to Ansible documentation and find out information about that. Okay, I'm on Ansible documentation now. So if you go to the top, this is actually under controlling where tasks run. So you can delegate delegation, and you can also run local action, right? So you can delegate tasks. But for us, we want to run local action. So if I scroll down to the bottom, yeah, I will actually see local playbook. So it may be useful to run your playbook locally. So in our case, we want to run our playbook locally, because the assumption is we don't have any EC2 instances, any managed hosts yet. That's what we want to create, right? So Ansible says we should use this flag dash connection if you are running in ad hoc mode. But if you are running a playbook, we should specify connection equals connection local, right, as the parameter. So that's where that's where I got that from. Okay, with that out of the way, now we know what this means. I don't want to gather fact. That's why I said no. If you want, you can say yes, but I don't need to because I'm running it locally. So then I want to define some set of tasks. So the first task is to create EC2 key, and I'm going to use EC2 key module. Remember when we went to Ansible documentation, I showed you this module, EC2 key module. That's the module we are using. Okay, so let me go back. So this is the module. So I'm creating a key pair that I want to give Recoy Ansible key. That's the key. That would be the key name. Possibly, let me even change the key name to my name. Actually, let me change it to Onisquity, right? That would be the name. That's the region. This is important, folks. The register is a way of saving the result. It's in a variable. So what I'm doing with this register is to save the result of this command inside a variable, this variable, which I will use later. So with this module, I will create key pair named Onisquity Ansible key on AWS, but I will also keep the result, right, using this variable. I will store the result inside this variable. Okay, so let's create. So from this stored result, I want to actually save my private key. Okay, so let me show you how to do that. Okay, now I've defined the second task, which is to save private key to current directory. So I want to save the private key. So I've created a public one, right, on AWS. I want to save the private key the private key from this register variable onto this local directory. You see there's no perm key here right now. So what I'm saying is the content of this result, the content of this has a key. It's a dictionary. It has a key, and that key has private key. So I want to get that content from here, and I want to save that content to this destination. I want to save it to this destination. That means I want to save it as serverkey.pem, right, in my current directory. And I'm using copy module. I mean, we've seen this multiple times. I'm using copy module, and I'm using mode to change mode. So I'm changing permission on this. I'm changing permission on this so that it should be a little bit restricted, yeah? So that nobody can run this, can use this key. And I'm also using this conditional variable when, right, to say that if you run this command multiple times, you only save this again. You only save this if this changed, right? If for some reason the name or anything or something changed there, right? That's the only time you will do this, right? So this is a conditional variable. This will only happen if there's a change here. So if there's no change, if Onyx Qt Ansible key is created, if you run this command, if you run this playbook multiple times, server underscore keypem will only be created if there's a change here. That's what this means. So let's save this and run the command and see what we get. Actually, before we run this command, let's quickly head to our AWS console and confirm that there's no key pair. So if you look at it, there's no key pair that is named. Let's go back here. That is named Onyx Qt Ansible key. There's no key pair like that here, right? Okay, so we're good. And if we look at our local, in our local directory, there's no pem key that is named serverkey.pem here, right? So now let's go back and run our playbook. So we're going to run Ansible playbook ec2 playbook.yaml. Okay, now I'm running Ansible playbook ec2 playbook.yaml, and let's see what happens. If everything goes well, okay, oh, that's fast. See, there was no pem key here. You see a pem key right here. This is good. It means we've been able to save it, right? That's good. This worked, right? Okay, so let's add on to our AWS console and confirm. Okay, we're now on our AWS console, right? If I refresh this, you can now see there is Ansible Onyx Qt Ansible key, right? Which is exactly the same thing that we specified here, right? It's exactly the same thing we specified here as the public key that will be saved on AWS, right? But from the register variable, we copy the private key to our current directory. So this is the private key that we will be using to we use this to provision EC2 instances, and we use the corresponding private key to interact with those instances. Once again, we've been able to create Onyx Qt Ansible key on AWS, as you can see right here. We've been able to create that, right? And if you come back to our local directory here, you've been able to save our private key as server_key.pem. Okay, with this, we've come to the end of part 1 of this video. In part 2, we will take it from here. We will take it from here by creating security group. Next, we then create EC2 instances. I hope this is clear enough. If not, you can just send me an email or just contact me. I will be glad to provide more explanation and context. Thank you so much. Stay tuned for part 2 of this video. Thank you.